Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome everybody to an amazing Sunday session, and it's earlier than usual. The theme of today is change. So I will be teaching the halakha today. No, I'm kidding. I'm just going to give my introduction. You know, we have so much change happening here at the world, in the world at large. You know, that I was going to mention that. But at this last minute, we just thought, okay, well, I'll sit down and give my introduction this way and try it out. Happy Mother's Day to everyone who is celebrating. You know, first of all, I, of course, have to call attention to the really amazing khutbah, as always, on Friday, given by Shayan Parsai. I'm always so proud of you know, what comes from the Prophet's pulpit here, and especially proud when Sharif and Shayan and, you know, Sheikh give really powerful messages off the Prophet's pulpit. You know, it's a sign of change here too, because now we have, you know, three really powerful voices talking about the world, and all of it is grounded in the Prophet, in the tafsir, the Project Illumin tafsir. And Shayan's talk on Friday was particularly powerful. It was talking about lessons from Surah Al-Aqaf and the sands of change, the sand dunes. The idea that, you know, if you are not building your foundation on something solid, you ultimately end up building your foundations on sand, which can change. And, you know, in this time of change, it's such a powerful reminder of how important it is for us to build our foundations and, you know, really go back to these lessons that we've been learning from the Quran. You know, what we did in those 3 years with what we learned from Sheikh was just so powerful. And I think on a Mother's Day, when we're thinking, you know, of the mothers in Palestine, when we're thinking of, you know, what the future holds, how much change happens every day. I mean, I think as I get older, I really learn time and time again how important it is to welcome change, to understand change, to be able to adapt to change. And the thing that allows you to find your roots in that foundation is truly your relationship with God. And so much grows from knowledge, from learning the Quran, especially as Muslims, to understand, okay, how do we navigate that? How do we find our anchor? How do we understand the world, especially when so much change involves so much darkness and hardship? So I really encourage people, if you haven't watched Shayan's beautiful khutbah, to go back, because he really walks us through again the lessons that we learned from the tafsir, from this very, very powerful khutbah, and shares lessons that we really haven't heard anywhere else about this particular surah. You know, here for us, you know, we have obviously a lot of people, you know, a lot of people moving and changing and things happening. We have, you know, wonderful resident fellows who, you know, come our way and they leave again. For us personally, I mean, you know, you see these people, these personalities on camera, we get to know them and love them here. And so when they come, we are so happy. When they leave and they go on, you know, this is a stop in their journey. You know, it's hard to see, you know, people you love come and go. And, you know, and then when you think about sort of the broader lessons of, you know, I thought I would share this story, you know, with Mother's Day. You know, Mother's Day is difficult because, you know, you think about your mom and wherever they are now. People here know that I've been caring for my mom, who is now elderly. And I've told stories, you know, 7 years ago when we started this journey here at Usuli, you know, I used to talk about how, as a convert, my relationship with my parents was really difficult because they didn't accept me being Muslim. Over time, you know, alhamdulillah, they noticed that what we were doing is actually not what they thought, you know, in terms of the Islamophobic lens of the world, but noticed that we are actually trying to create beauty and talk about, you know, ways that we can move things forward in our world. And now, you know, my mom is to a state where she is actually, you know, not her memory loss, or she's had memory loss issues. And so she's actually, you know, not the same person she was 7 years ago. And again, underscoring, you know, this notion of change. it would be hard to imagine your life with or without your mother, if you didn't have sort of a foundation and faith in God, and understanding that, this journey is up and down. It's hard. It's sometimes beautiful, sometimes heartbreaking. But when you understand, the lessons that you should learn from these experiences, and that the journey, everyone has a journey, and we're hopefully all trying to get to the same destination, a beautiful place with God. That makes that everything makes sense, and makes life easier to manage. So anyway, it's hard to say much, with everything going on in the world these days. But I'm happy that we have this opportunity to gather and build our knowledge and build our strength and build our foundations together. So thank you for being with us. And I wish everyone a very happy Sunday, happy Mother's Day. And I look forward to another amazing session with the Book of Illuminations. So.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه المختارين وعلى من اتبع بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب. Okay, so we are at 68. Okay, although we stopped a bit suddenly last time, but I think that I don't think there is anything else that I wanted to say about 67. Although 68 is bolsters, and in many ways is a continuation of 67. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to 68. قوم أقامهم الحق لخدمته وقوم اختصهم بمحبته. And then the Quranic ayah كلا نمد هؤلاء وهؤلاء من عطاء ربك ما كان عطاء ربك محظورا. Okay, so God makes some people remain in God's service and singles out others to love God. And then the Quranic verse, all do we aid these as well as those out of the bounty of thy Lord. And the bounty of thy Lord is not limited. Now, of course, he's citing the Quranic verse in support of the idea that God aids, or God is behind diverse means of manifesting godliness. And that's the basics. That's the basic theme that is intended in 68, or in some texts 67. In the same way that we saw in the aphorism before this, that do not judge per superficial appearance, uh, do not define your relationship to al-haq, to truth, and to veracity according to external appearances of piety. Here is the the angle, if you will, moves inwards to say that understand that even when it comes to a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even when it comes to how people relate to God, and for our modern world, the way we often talk about love, it's a bit unusual because it's a different perspective. That even when it comes to the issue of loving God, the intended point here is that there are people that God, by the if you will, by the way God created them, by their emotional, psychological readiness, by their intellectual readiness, the way that they will relate to God is indeed to fall in love with God, very much like a lover falls in love with the beloved. They will relate to God through an intense emotional um, uh, being intensely engulfed emotionally. But there are people that are not capable of that and not intended to be like that. They will never be fully enraptured, sort of, uh, uh, if you will, romantically in love with God. In fact, the way that they relate through God or relate to God is through a very different form of fidelity and a very different form of loyalty, and that's service. They're the way they can bond with the divine is through, if you will, action. And the theme that is being anchored here is that do not fall into the trap of thinking, of judging one path to be superior to the other, and be content by the path that God facilitates before you. So that's the introspection part. So if you are one of those people who just doesn't understand, how can you fall in love with the metaphysical? Because there are a lot of people like that who simply say, I don't understand the types of feelings that you're talking about. I don't understand that experience, that type of passion. And this principle is basically saying it's perfectly okay if if that's not your path. Dedicate yourself to a very different path, and that is the path of service, of discharging. If you remember, we talked about adab, and we talked about um, uh, one of the most fundamental principles of adab is gratitude, and the way that you discharge your obligation of gratitude and the way that you exhibit adab towards your maker is through service, through the performance of obligations um, that you owe your maker. And then the, the, the external part to this is um, to embed in the same way that God did not create you to judge people. God also expects from you to understand, as his citation of the Quranic verse in this context indicates, that there are different pathways to the Lord, and that Allah is behind these different pathways, and that you are not permitted to say, well, this person is constantly working so hard to, for instance, um, and of course, the most clear example that you could imagine, someone is constantly engaged in dawah, or someone is constantly helping out the destitute, or someone is constantly helping out those who are displaced, those who are refugees, and they do so out of their commitment to their Lord. Uh, the fact that you find someone who is ecstatic in God's love, it doesn't mean that they are superior, and it doesn't mean that one path is superior to the other. Also, remember the story about Junaid seeing the poor person begging for alms before a mosque. The converse is true, that if you see someone who is enraptured by God, do not fall in the trap of saying, well, um, we don't see them performing jihad all the time, so it must be that they lack piety. What is what the norm that is constantly, you'll find, affirmed, and something that is um, sort of hammered again and again, um, is how dangerous it is to sit in judgment over people's piety. That is really the constant thing, because it's like hate. There are certain things that are so self-destructive to the person who exhibits them. And similarly, when your psychological orientation is constantly towards evaluating people's relationships to their Lord, and this is what you are constantly sort of focused on, it, it will erode you before anyone else. It, in fact, it is uh, it is fundamentally at odds with any real sense of piety. If you're constantly concerning yourself with um, who is true and who's not true with God, rather than whether you are true with God, uh, it will erode your spiritual standing. It will erode the authenticity of your relationship with God, and in inevitably you end up being one form of a hypocrite or another. Okay, let's make sure I didn't forget anything. Yeah, this is I mean, this is just a matter of terminology. Um, Often people who are people of service, and they're not mutually exclusive, mind you, of course, but are often referred to as Ahl al-Burhan, and people of who are their service is by it being a living example of how it is possible to fall in love with God and be in love with God, are often referred to as Ahl al-Shuhud. I don't, there are scholars that will, elaborate some detail about the terminology, why a group is called Ahl al-Burhan and the other are called Ahl al-Shuhud. Um, I don't think it's that significant. Um, yeah, okay. Yeah, let's leave it at that. Okay, so we can move on to um, 69. Okay. قلما تكون الواردات الإلهية إلا بغتة إلا بغتة صيانة لها أن يدعيها العبد بوجود الاستعداد. Okay, so it is rare that divine inspirations come except suddenly, and this so that they be protected, the divine inspirations be protected from servants claiming them by virtue of the existence of receptivity on their part. Okay, this is it needs a little bit of understanding, but so al-waridat al-ilahiyya are these. Remember, we talked about al-waridat al-ilahiyya and al-tawariq al-shaytaniyya. The al-waridat al-ilahiyya are the divine gifts where, and they are inspirations where you, through the benevolence of the Lord, you go through in life through experiencing moments of closeness, moments of intimacy, moments of transparency, moments of truth, moments of authenticity, moments of luminosity. If you are paying attention, and if you are alert, and if you are determined to develop your relationship with your maker, who should be the center of your existence, because you come from your maker and you return to your maker, you are always alert to investing in these divine visitations to so that they will become more significant, and so they will become more frequent. And as we said, it's like opening doors and closing doors. So it's when the divine inspiration comes knocking, you are alert enough not to miss the visitor. So you are alert enough to open the door and to basically, allegorically, to invite the divine inspiration in the same way that you are ready when shaitan comes knocking at your door, that you are ready to shut the door and to refuse to grant entry. So, what is being emphasized here is that one of the the uh, one of the greatest dangers and of dangers of corruptibility, or one of the highest risks of corruption, are those that, which is unfortunately something that happens all too often, are that human beings become start pretending as if the divine resides within, meaning that as if they start claiming that they are semi-divine, or that they embody divinity, or they are a representative of um, God on earth. Uh, and of course, that claim is based on the premise that the divine no longer comes knocking and I open the door, but the divine is actually within me, is constantly in residence, if you will. And for the seeker, for the sojourner, the student that is seeking this path, you are warned time and time and time again about how the corruptibility of that temptation to get to a point where you say, um, I am now God's friend. And that is why you often find, especially in our modern day, you often find all types of people taking God for granted and just claiming to be friends of God, and saying, oh, I talk to God every day, and it, it, that type of hubris, that type of arrogance is extremely destructive to the self and destructive to the meaning of divinity in our life as well. And so one of the important points of education in this path is that the claim or the attitude, even if you don't claim it, but if you have the attitude that, oh, well, uh, I bring in or I invite the divine at will, and the divine is with me at will. And the language says, قَلَّمَا تَكُونَ. It say, it is rare um, for the divine to visit except suddenly. This is not to say that it cannot happen. This is not the claim. The claim is, or the um, uh, pedagogical point, the learning point, the teaching point, is that internalize within that the divine visits as a favor, and you respond to this favor with an enormous amount of gratitude. And you invest whatever you invest without the expectation, the equation where you say, well, I'm investing X, so my return must be Y. That leads to a corruption. So, in other words, when you invest, be grateful for whatever bounty the divine will provide, and whatever enlightenment, whatever true perceptions, whatever truth and beauty is visited upon you. But to feel the expectation, to feel an entitlement, is a corruption. And in fact, will destroy the entire relationship. And of course, the other part to it is um, to anchor within you the danger of taking the divine and the presence of the divine, to take God and God's presence for granted. That the skepticism towards anyone that says, well, I call upon the divine at will. Um, from life experience, it's not that, there are people that I've encountered in life where I thought to myself, they're so close to God that it sure looks to me like they pretty much call on God at will. That's undeniable. But part of their piety, and every person that I've met like that, part of their piety was their utter humility before God. Part of their piety was that when you talk to them, um, they they were more than anyone else that you knew who is not so close to God. Um, their entire relationship with God was never presumptuous in the way they talked about God, the way they related to God. It was never presumptuous, and it would, and as we will see, because this is another aphorism that, or set of aphorisms that we'll talk about, is that their the intimate details of their relationship with God is guarded by secrecy, and that's also part of um, the sort of the immunizing one against the dangers of arrogance and presumptuousness, and the dangers of God becoming sort of um, a, an enabler of human hubris and arrogance, because that's always the biggest danger when in human relationships with the divine, is that what starts out as what could start out as sort of a, a path full of good intentions, the corruptibility of human beings claiming the powers of the divine, the status of the divine to themselves, is so fundamentally contrary to piety. Let me make sure I didn't forget anything. Oh, yeah, okay. There is about al-waridat al-ilahiyya, this whole, on the theme of presumptuousness and divine visitations. These, of course, they when one is a novice, when one is starting at this path, uh, they could take the form of, they could take many different forms. They could, you could see someone in the street hungry and shivering, and you feel compelled to take care of this person. That's a divine visitation. You see an injustice and you feel compelled to do something about it. That's a divine visitation. That's a warid ilahi. Uh, you feel that you cannot suppress a testimony of truth and that you must speak out. That's a divine visitation. You feel that you're suddenly your heart is overcome and tears coming to your eyes, and you're not even sure why you are tearing up or you're crying. That's the divine visitation. And again, it's like the divine knocking at your door. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to invite the divine in and say welcome, or are you going to distract yourself and pretend that no one is knocking at your door? You feel that you don't pray well enough, or you don't pray often enough, or you don't your fasting is not as meaningful as it should be, or you feel that you don't give enough money, you're not don't, or you get the emotion that which I'm sure you are going on about your life, and then you see something about, I'm just using a real life example from something about Islamic manuscripts, and then you feel this voice inside of you saying, I have the resources to do something about it, and you feel for at least for a little bit, oh, I need to do something about it. And then life distracts you and you forget about that thought that visited you. This is a very common experience. But what is not common is to be alert and say, these are waridat ilahiyya, these are divine visitations, and I must invite these divine visitations. Now, of course, as you go onto these paths, if you become more and more accustomed to inviting the divine into your life and having the proper attitude of modesty and humility as the divine visits you. So, as you learn to open the door and invite the divine in, and it is even, it even rubs us the wrong way. Arrogance before the divine. You cannot invite the divine in and exhibit arrogance, or you cannot invite the divine in and take the divine for granted. These are obvious points, but remarkably, as obvious as they are, as common an error you will find in real life, that people are constantly uh, meeting the divine with a great deal of arrogance and a great deal of hubris and a great deal of self-entitlement and so on and so forth. But this, what does secrecy, when we say that ultimately when you invite when the divine visits you frequently enough and you welcome the visitation, and the visitation becomes more and more frequent until it involves into a real intimacy with God. And the way you protect this intimacy is through secrecy. Disclosure of the intimacy erodes it. When you talk about it, it will erode it. Because the minute you talk about it, the ego plays a role. But what I what I remember around 69, I mean, I'm not sure if it was exactly a 69 or, an aphorism before, an aphorism after, but I think it was around 69, is something that you're told and you don't quite fully understand until you experience it, is that how unique that um, and indescribable, the maqam al-mushahada. So, what when when you commune with your Lord, how does it feel like? And in the same way that you cannot describe what sweetness is to someone who's never tasted something sweet. If someone has never tasted sweetness, something sugary, it is impossible to describe sweetness. There are certain things that cannot be described. Or if someone who's never tasted bitterness in their life, and you try to describe to them what bitterness is, the only way that people can comprehend certain things is through relating it to lived experiences. There are certain things like sweetness or bitterness um, that, or um, uh, someone who uh, has never smelled flowers, and you try to describe to them, you know, how, what type of fragrance a flower emits. So is a when you commune with your Lord and you are not simply visited by proxy. So you are not visited through an impulse to do or not to do. So the visitation early on in your journey is to help a poor person, to speak the truth, to you feel. But when you get to the point that the way that you are visited, the way that the divine knocks at your door, is through the divine presence. It is indescribable. And so any description corrupts the experience. Exactly like the taste of sweetness or the fragrance or so on. So, I remember hearing this decades now ago, where, you're told it just cannot be described, and do not attempt to describe it, because if you try to describe it, you will corrupt it. And the minute you start telling people about what you experience, the minute that the demonic tries to creep into the experience. Because the minute now that you are using it, to the demonic will find pathways to the ego to it's like rot. It's like, mold when it invades a healthy structure. The demonic is often like mold, like black mold, like a form of rot that comes in. And so that's why, and I'm just, it, when you first hear it, like a lot of things, it's abstract. But when you experience it, it clicks, and it clicks thoroughly and completely. Um, the uniqueness, the singularity, uh, the fact that in the same way that God is like no other, the experience of God is like no other. It's truly singular, and there is no frame of reference. And if you are honest with yourself, and if you are transparent, and if you're self-critical, you completely understand through lived practice how disclosure is corruption, and how especially people's respect and adoration and admiration is corruption. The minute that part of your relationship goes through the senses of others. So, what others think of you. Um, that relationship that you have with your Lord starts eroding immediately. And it's amazing because it is if you're honest with yourself. I mean, there are plenty of people who are not honest with themselves, and their relationship with God might have been stellar at one point, but it has long become corrupted and long has eroded because there are too many fans that are, blowing air uh, up their windmill or whatever the expression is. Um, but if you are guarding yourself with transparency and with constant vigilant introspection, then you clearly see that it is very, and that is why you guard it with secrecy. Okay, let's. I think I covered. Yeah, I'll say this again and then move on. Um, I mean, you encounter it, of course, in the United States, but you encounter it much more in Muslim countries. Uh, in a country like Egypt, I've been introduced to. It's quite common in certain circles where you introduce to people uh, who will, the minute shortly after you meet them, you know that they claim to see. Is everything okay? Oh. They will claim to see all types of metaphysical things and to have uh, perception and knowledge, and this training, in fact, anchors you in deep sense of skepticism as to all those who wear their piety on their sleeve. Um, Unfortunately, piety lends itself to theatrics, and the thing that destroys piety the most is theatrics. And so, okay, so 70 builds as it builds upon the same theme of modesty and humility and um, being vigilant in your um, so من رأيته مجيبا عن كل ما سئل ومعبرا عن كل ما شهد وذاكرا كل ما علم فاستدل بذلك على وجود جهله. One of the very important ones. Okay, so if you find someone or if you see someone who answers every question they're asked, claims to basically answer the question, meaning that they don't, it's rare for them to say, I don't know. ومعبرا عن كل ما شهد, and in fact doesn't guard the experience with secrecy, but will often sit and talk to you about um, their dhikr and what they experience in their dhikr, or uh, what they experience in their journey. Uh, um, Here, expressing all that they witness in reference to the the spiritual path. and constantly speaks about وذاكرا كل ما علم, that constantly is boisterous about their knowledge. In other words, they're constantly showing off how much they know, how much they've learned. Know that this is a truly ignorant. And this, of course, if you know the Sunnah well, and you know the tradition of the companions, the tradition of Ahlul Bayt, you know that this is a fundamental point, that it is the height of ignorance to speak about what you don't know rather than say, I don't know. And it is the height of ignorance to assume that you know. Those who truly know how much they don't know. I mean, once you really learn, you discover how ignorant you are. And that ignorance humbles you, because you are always burdened by how limited your knowledge is. But particularly as to, again, the relationship to the divine, those who are constantly displaying, and in the United States and in the West generally, the way that people display their piety is not necessarily by sitting and pontificating in halaqas about, thinking that they know much more than they actually know, or jumping to declaring themselves a master of a halaqa when in fact they're not qualified to do so. In the West, we see this by the number of people who will, rush to give khutbahs at Jum'ah, or to always act as if they're the authoritative spokesperson on what Islam is or Islam is not. Or, quite importantly, testifying falsely as to their religious knowledge and piety by putting on the indicia of piety. In other words, wearing the clothes of piety, because this is a form of testifying. This is a form of expression. You are not knowledgeable, but you put on the outer appearance of the knowledgeable, and you change the tone of your voice, you change the language, you change your expressions, you change your dress, you change your outer look, in order to basically communicate to people, look at me, I'm an authority. All of that are fundamentally at odds with the path to piety, path to true and real visitation. And all of it is at odds with the path to true knowledge. And all of it is, again, the corruptions of the ego and the invasion of the rot, the demonic rot that's like mold. One of the biggest risk, and this is something that just life has taught me, it is what satisfies human beings are always looking for a sense of satisfaction about, okay, I've done what I need to address that sense of anxiety within. I've done what I need to do to feel satisfied that the job is done. So, if your profession as a doctor, at what point do you feel I've done what I need to do? The discharging of the sense of obligation. if you're a lawyer, at what point do you say, okay, I've done what I need to do professionally? If you're a teacher, at what point in a high school or something, at what point do you say, do you have that inner voice within you that says, okay, I've done my job? Say, if you're a student, the biggest danger about ostentatious displays of piety is that they give you a false sense of fulfillment. So when it comes to Islamic issues, it becomes my displaying of religiosity is what makes me feel like I've served Islam. While there is a gap between the actual form of service and the actual service needed. So if you and this is uh, uh, you find this in the realm of especially in intellectual issues and thinking and thought. If recently I was researching an issue, and I've read you read pre-modern I read pre-modern texts that were written on this issue, and like all pre-modern texts, there is you find complexity of unless you're reading texts that are just akhbari texts, meaning reports. When you are reading texts that are analytical texts, you actually find depth of analysis. But then when you read modern Islamic works, you find that there is the, a reliance, when it comes to substance, a reliance on the pre-modern, but when you depart from the pre-modern, there is nothing really but rhetoric. And when I finally, to get some serious analysis of the issue, I had to go to um, scholarship that was written in the West about the issue I was researching. Um, in other words, academic articles. And you constantly think about what is it in the Islamic context that leads the Muslim researcher to the modern Muslim researcher to such superficiality. And at least my experience in life, it, it, time and time again, is that we are accustomed to the claims of piety or displays of piety as filling the gap whenever we sense that gap. So the reason that a researcher out of the Islamic context is doing the type of due diligence that writes an article that is truly meaningful and truly layered and sophisticated, while the Muslim researcher, because time and time again I can tell that the Muslim researcher comes to the tough questions and then responds to them by pietistic talk. And it is the same old theme of religion being the opiate of the people. Unfortunately, when religion is corrupted, it does very much become the opiate of the people. But think of when, the aphorisms of the Hikam al-Ata'iyya, written centuries ago, builds upon a long tradition. When you think about the founders, the early founders, the forefathers, the Ahlul Bayt and the Sahaba, they didn't labor under that ailment of displays of piety, standing in for the actual gaps. In other words, they actually understood that real service is what is needed for a meaningful relationship with God, and not displays. And that's because they took religion quite seriously. But it is an ailment, especially of the modern Muslim. And so an aphorism like this, if you find someone mujiban an kulli ma su'il, constantly ready to display their Islamic knowledge, mu'abbiran an kulli ma shahid, that constantly is bragging or expressing or displaying their pietistic experiences, how well they know God and how well they feel God and so on. وَذَاكِرًا كُلَّ مَا عَلِمْ, and is constantly speaking about what they know, then know that you are before someone who's truly ignorant. That is the essence of ignorance. Okay, did I forget anything? Yeah, okay. Let's take one more and then we'll stop. Okay, so 71. Um, إنما جعل الدار الآخرة محلا لجزاء عباده المؤمنين، لأن هذه الدار لا تسع ما يريد أن يعطيهم، ولأنه أجل أقدارهم عن أن يجازيهم في دار لا بقاء لها. Okay. This God made the hereafter as an abode of reward. It is a great spiritual, it's a great spiritual enlightenment, a point of illumination, when you understand that not only is this world, this life, a place where we are tested, but that this life is a place in which there are serious limitations as to what you, as a creation of the divine, is able to receive and enjoy. So that God has made the hereafter as an abode of reward. This world cannot contain what God wishes to bestow or to give. Now, why is that? In fact, because you as a human being, your worth is too high to reward for a sufficient, ample reward in a world without permanence. Now, so here is one, the worth of a human being. When a human being commits a moral infraction by being ungrateful, by taking this world and basically telling God, I don't believe you, I believe this world is it. you give the lie to God, because God told you that this world is not it, and you are telling God, I don't believe you. Okay, so what you're paying for are the moral infractions of disbelieving God and being ungrateful to God, and it is your choice. But if you have not committed these moral infractions, what your worth and your deserve as the beholder of the breath of God is a world of permanence. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that what you deserve are, fruits and gold and honey, and but what you deserve is, and we've talked about this in the tafsir a lot, is that what you deserve is in proportion to who you are as a person, whether it is, but it is a a world that is far more meaningful and far more permanent and far more real than this life. And aphorism 71, one is to try to, and this is subhanAllah, just from experience, it is really important for real piety, is to try to anchor in the psychology of the sojourner the value of human beings in God's eye. That humans are not a means, they're not tools, they're not uh, a they're not a commodity. That a human being is a very big deal, and so big, it's such a big deal that they are, and this is like all the hadith that tells you, the death of one believer is, or the life of one believer is worth in God's eye more than the Kaaba itself, and all these hadiths, they stem or they come from the same well. That first, the worth of a human being, and then when this human being is a believer, what the entitlements or the rights, the haqq of such a human being. Because that is part and parcel of your journey towards piety. You, as we said before, you cannot access God except through God's creation, whether human beings or the created Quran in general. There is no path, no way that you can reach God except through God's creation. The danger in getting to a point where you believe that you've reached God is that you marginalize God's creation. Is that you get to a point where you think that God's creation is no longer important. Oh, my relationship with God is so intimate that I can disdain humanity or look down upon humanity. It is fundamentally at odds with piety. But even you internally, as a sojourner, piety is not possible unless you understand the value, the worth of this life compared to the life that this is not the real thing. This appears to you as to be the beginning and the end, but it is not. And the more you look down upon this life, the more that you understand that this life is temporal, is temporary, it is a means to an end, not the end, the more you are able to detach enough to build a meaningful relationship with your Lord. And the more it becomes possible to say, you know, so what if I don't enjoy things in this life? Or so what if I don't get everything I want to get in this life? I- this life was never intended to be uh, the ultimate goal. I mean, subhanAllah, if you think of if the way that Muslims in the modern age relate to their money is such a powerful testament to the extent to which real piety is missing from their heart. I mean, subhanAllah, you find when I see how a lot of non Muslims uh, are far more generous when it comes to their relationship to their money, in the same way that, decades ago, some like Rafa Tahtawi, who went to Europe and said, I saw Islam without Muslims, because people, valued cleanliness. People did not rely on bribes, were not corrupt. People did their jobs out of a sense of obligation of duty. In the same way, when I see the way non-Muslims uh, relate to money as something that must do good, not just something that brings them pleasure or protect their children. Again, the same theme. I see Islam without Muslims, and the way you see Muslims relate to their money in the modern age, it's the power. It's the most powerful testament that regardless of what they do in their masjids, and regardless of what they do in their Islamic centers, and regardless of what they do about the hijab, and regardless of what they do, all these are affectations. And when it comes to where the rubber hits the road, they lack piety. They don't understand what this dunya is and what the role of money in this dunya is. And they don't listen to their Lord. They don't support Islamic causes the way they're supposed to support them. Um, yeah, there was one other thing that was I want to tell you about 71, but it's skipping it sort of was on the tip of my tongue and then it went away. Um, uh, Probably it will come when I least expect it to come. Um, yeah, anyway, it's not coming. It's all right. So I think we can stop here. Yeah, we are getting very close to finishing. There are sort of stages in training, and we are getting very close to. I think it is at 72, um, or no, maybe 75. I don't quite remember. I'll check. Where you've if you are actually implementing these aphorisms as we go along, you would be considered to have finished the second stage and then ready to move on to the third. But we could elaborate upon this inshallah later on. All right, so let's stop here, and next halaqah inshallah we'll start with 72.
It's green. It's good. Do you want to adjust any, like the... Is that good? Okay. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, Sheikh. As always, this was really, really powerful and important, I think, again, to underscore just the individual person's journey. I think in the beginning when you were saying, some people have the path of falling in love in a different way, and other people maybe fall in love with God through service. It's like so many of the things that we've learned in this space have been so powerful for just understanding, how intimate, how important, how individual that relationship with God is. And, we often live in this space where people are looking at, other people, trying to compare themselves, trying to understand how they're doing, where do I fit into this whole, relationship. But it's always beautiful to understand and learn that it's so individual, it's so personal, it's so intimate, and that everyone's journey is unique. And like here, I think we're always teaching people about empowerment and finding that, whatever it is that God gave you, your own individual package, and how you can take it and run with it and make change. And that feels like that's really what is necessary, especially in this time where a lot of us feel alone, a lot of us feel very individual in our path. But it's really reassuring to know that there isn't any particular path except humility, honesty, beauty, and connection with God in whatever way you can connect individually. Thank you so much. These are so meaningful, especially in these dark times. And again, help us to build that foundation from the bottom. So I'm really looking forward to another session next week. It's great to see everybody online. Thank you for joining us. I hope you guys are doing well. And we will see you next week, inshallah. So, assalamu alaikum.